I never intended to stray from the trail, but the forest called me deeper, whispering secrets I could not ignore. The trees grew closer together, blocking out the sun until the world turned into a claustrophobic maze of shadows. That is when I saw it, a massive, decaying structure looming over the clearing, an abandoned hospital left to rot. My pulse quickened as I approached the entrance, the heavy iron doors groaning as if warning me to turn back immediately. The air smelled of wet earth and something ancient, something that had been decaying for decades, trapped within these cold walls. I pushed inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the thick, stagnant dust that danced like ghosts in the stagnant, freezing air of the long-forgotten main entrance hall. As I walked deeper, a woman appeared in the distance, standing perfectly still at the end of the long, dark corridor. She wore a long, vintage gray nurse's uniform, her head and body completely covered by a thick, dark hijab, ensuring not a single strand of hair or skin was visible. She did not move. She did not breathe. She simply stared into the darkness, radiating an aura of profound, suffocating sadness that felt heavy on my chest. I called out to her, asking if she needed help, but my voice felt swallowed by the thick, oppressive silence of the ward. She began to slowly drift backward without moving her feet, her gaze locked onto mine with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Every step I took forward, she maintained the exact same distance, drawing me further into the labyrinth of the abandoned psychiatric wing. The walls began to change, the peeling paint revealing strange, handwritten medical charts carved directly into the rotting, damp concrete. I stopped to examine one, realizing it was dated 100 years in the future, filled with names I somehow recognized as my own family. My breath hitched, the realization crashing down on me that I had been here before, many times, trapped in a repeating nightmare. I turned to run, but the corridor behind me had vanished, replaced by an endless wall of thick, twisting tree roots growing through the floor. The forest was reclaiming the hospital, or perhaps the hospital was a parasitic growth inside the forest itself. The woman in the hijab was suddenly right beside me, her presence cold as ice, yet she remained utterly silent, her eyes filled with an infinite, terrifying ancient sorrow. She pointed a gloved finger toward a room labeled ICU, where the sound of a steady, rhythmic heart monitor echoed through the halls. Beep, beep, beep. It went, a slow, dying rhythm that matched the pulsing of the walls around us. I knew, with a certainty that broke my spirit, that I was not the visitor here, but the patient who never managed to walk out of that room. I entered the room, and there, lying on the bed, was my own body, hooked to machines that were now centuries old. The woman in the hijab stood over the bed, holding a medical file, her form beginning to flicker and distort like a dying image on a broken television screen. She was the nurse, and the doctor and the prisoner all rolled into one entity bound to this eternal, dark place. She finally spoke, her voice a chorus of 1,000 whispers that seemed to come from the trees outside. "You were never meant to wake up," she intoned, her voice echoing in my very mind. The machine's beep turned into a continuous, flat, piercing tone that vibrated through my bones, signaling that the time for my escape had officially expired, and the cycle was resetting once more. The floor beneath me turned into quicksand, pulling me down into a dark, root-filled abyss beneath the hospital foundation. I saw hundreds of other people, all trapped in the same loop, all staring up with the same hollow, dead eyes. This hospital wasn't just a building. It was a feeding ground for the forest, a mechanism designed to harvest the souls of those who dared to wander too far from the path. I tried to scream, but the roots grew into my throat, silencing me as they began to pull me into the damp, cold earth. The last thing I saw was the woman in the hijab, looking down at me with a tragic smile, before she turned to walk back to the corridor to wait for the next unlucky traveler to stumble upon her domain. Everything faded to black, the silence of the forest returning as if nothing had ever happened. The hospital, the woman, the trauma, all vanished into the heavy, thick mist that clung to the forest floor like a burial shroud. Only the trees remained, older and wiser, waiting for the next cycle to begin, for the next victim to mistake the path for a shortcut. But then the twist. A hiker's camera was found, months later, near the edge of those same woods, miles from any structure. The footage showed the hiker walking into the trees, but the final frame of the video was not a camera drop. It was a selfie of the hiker, standing right next to me, inside that exact hospital ward. I was the victim, yes, but I was also the patient, the nurse, and the forest itself. I realized with terrifying clarity that we are all part of the hospital's anatomy. The hiker's camera was not found by anyone. It was placed there by me to lure the next one into the cycle, to ensure the hospital never runs out of souls to sustain its dark, root-bound existence. The forest is not just a collection of trees. It is a biological, supernatural machine that requires human consciousness to grow. Every person who goes missing in those woods isn't dead in the traditional sense. They are processed, recorded, and stored in the memory of the bark and the roots. I am now the archivist of this forest, and I am watching you read this right now. If you ever find yourself hiking and the path ahead looks a little too inviting, a little too quiet, turn around and run. Do not look for the hospital, do not look for the nurse, and for the love of everything, do not stop to examine the trees. The forest is hungry, and it is currently deciding if you are worth adding to its vast, eternal collection. Because I am still there, waiting in the corner of your vision, just behind the curtain of the trees, holding the door open for you. The hospital is not a place. It is a destiny, and once you hear the heartbeat of the forest, you are already checked in. Sleep tight, because the ward is always accepting new patients, and I am the head nurse.